Yep. Farid, can you help me to record? Yes, you got it? Okay, thank you so much. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I prefer to greet you that way because not all of us experience the same time zone. Thank you for joining us for this plenary session, special plenary session 1, under the theme The Occupied Palestine and Feminist Movements. So this session is part of the second annual Kartini Conference on Indonesian Feminisms, or KCIF for short, held virtually or online from June 24 to 30, 2024. I'm Ira, the host of the session and this Zoom. So this is day 4 of Friday, 28th of June in Indonesian time, and the session will kick off day 5 in this conference. So there are 2 agendas before I give this forum to Mbak Riri, our moderator of this session. So first, the official greetings and welcoming by the conference chair and the poetry reading. So without further ado, I give the forum to Farid. Please, Farid.
All right, thank you, Ira. Ladies and gentlemen, and all the queer self, she, he, and they, please allow me to use 5 minutes of the beginning of the session on behalf of the conference chair, representing the conference organizer, a consortium for plural and inclusive Indonesian feminism, to officially welcome you all, my distinguished guests, and express my sincere thanks and appreciation for your participation and contribution. Welcome to this special plenary session on the occupied Palestine and feminist movement at the second annual Kartini Conference on Indonesian Feminism. A warmest welcome and a very special thanks dedicated to a group of excellent scholars who will be the speakers of our session today. Dr. Loren Lybarger, my professor at Ohio University, who served as a member of my thesis committee back then, long time ago. Just so you know that taking an Islam course with you at Ohio University really completed my learning process on Islam after studying Islam in a madrasah or in a boarding school and at the State Islamic University in Jakarta. And just so you know again, I'm still your student and you are still my professor. I'm thrilled to see you in Indonesia virtually after so long. Also, Dr. Dina Siddiqui has been a colleague for quite long. We were part of the Asian and global communities for the transformation of masculinity. And I was an honorary participant of SANAM, Southeast Asian Network, to address masculinity, where Dr. Siddiqui was an active board. Dr. Siddiqui will soon fly to Yogyakarta to attend the AAS in Asia meeting. So please, everybody, if you are all around Yogyakarta, see, welcome, and treat her well. Thanks so much, Dr. Siddiqui. Nida Tayem, I know this is my first time meeting you and hopefully not the last. As Palestinian scholar and activist, Nida Tayem is a key for our discussion today. Thank you so much and very happy to welcome you. Last and absolutely not least, my colleague for a long time, my mentor and role model in social justice and feminist movement, one of the strongest representation of Indonesian feminism at the global level, Dr. Intan Paramaditha. Thank you so much and welcome to this session. I will not forget to welcome Mbak Riri Hariro, who accepted our challenge to be the moderator of the session. You were chosen to moderate the session, not because only because we come from the same Mafia OU. If you still remember, a group of Ohio University alumni in Indonesia, the proud Indonesian Bobcat. You are the right person to do this job. So thank you so much. As you will hear from the poem I Must Die by Refaat Al-Arir, Rest in Heaven, that we will read. If Refaat and many Palestinians must die, we the feminists must live. So we can continue using feminism to tell the story of injustices, oppression, discrimination, colonialism, genocide, and violence. We continue fighting for justice and humanity. This session is brought to you as a reminder for all of us that feminism must live forever, should always stay connected to the tragedy of humanity and provide its biggest contribution to challenging the system, structure, ideology, and parties behind it. Ladies and gentlemen, and the queer self, please join me in welcoming our distinguished and extraordinary speakers and the moderator. Thank you so much and happy learning in this session. I return to Ira.
Yeah, thank you, Farid, for the welcoming remarks. So now the second agenda is before our discussion starts. We will read a poem called If I Must Die. So Farid and I will read the poem. So If I Must Die, a poem by the martyr Ribat al-Arir, a poet and professor of English literature at the Islamic University of Gaza, who was killed by Israeli occupation forces on December 6, 2023, along with many members of his family during an airstrike in northern Gaza. Before he died, he wrote this poem for his daughter Shaima and posted it on Twitter or X, and it has been viewed almost 30 million times. And the poetry, originally written in English, went viral and was translated into various languages. Rivad wrote it in English for the world to read it. But today we let it live in Arabic and Indonesian as well. So Farid and I will recite the poetry in Arabic as Rivad's native language, and English as the original one, and I'll read it, the Indonesian, translated by Farid Muttaqin, and the Arabic translation by Yusuf Musa. If I Must Die by Rivad al-Harir.
إن كان علي الموت ولا بد رفعت الأرير.
If I must die, you must live.
إن كان علي الموت ولا بد فلتحيا أنت.
To tell my story, to sell my things.
لكي تحكي قصتي وتبيع ثيابي.
To buy a piece of cloth and some strings.
وتبتاع سواها ثوبا أبيض وخيوط.
Make it white with long tail.
حاول أن تجعلها بيضاء ويلحقها ذيل ممتد.
So that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye,
حتى يتمكن الطفل في غزة انحدق في سقف سماء.
awaiting his dad, who left in a blaze and bid no one farewell.
منتظرا عودة والده من رحل شريعا دون وداع.
Not even to his flesh, not even to himself.
لم يملك وقتا ليودع أحبابا أهلا وأقاربا أو نفسا.
Seize the kite, my kite you made, flying up above.
والطفل هلال التهديق يرى طائرة ورقية. طائرتي بيديك صنعت تحلق فوق الطفل بعيدا.
And thinks for a moment, an angel is there, bringing back love.
سيظن بأن ملكا جاء هنا كي يرجع بعض من حب.
If I must die,
إن كان علي الموت ولا بد
let it bring hope.
فلتحيا بموتي آمال.
Let it be a tale.
وليروى رحيلي كحكاية. Salam for Rifaat Al-Ari.
Thank you. I'll read the Indonesian translation, translated by Farid Mutaqin. Jika aku harus mati. Jika aku harus mati, kau mesti hidup untuk mewartakan kisahku, untuk menjual barang peninggalanku, untuk membeli sehelai kain dan beberapa gulung benang. Buatlah putih dengan untayan panjang agar anak itu yang terseduh di pojok Gaza, yang tampak surga di matanya, menanti sang ayah yang lenyap dalam bara. Selamat tinggal pada siapapun, bahkan ada serpihan jasadnya, ada dirinya sekalipun. Memandang layang-layang, layang-layangku yang kau buat menari di awan. Sekejap membayangkan malaikat menabur cinta. Jika aku harus mati, jadikanlah asa, rangkailah sebuah kisah. So thank you so much. So that's the end of the poem. Rest in Power, Revat al-Arir. Free Palestine, Stop Colonialism and Genocide, and Continue Humanity. Palestine and Palestinians are feminist issue, and Palestine is a feminist issue and feminist movement issue. So now I will give the Zoom forum to Riri Hariro, who will be a moderator of this special plenary session. I will introduce you a little bit about Riri. Riri Hariro, MA. She graduated from Southeast Asian Studies at Ohio University. She is also a gender and inclusive activist, women's rights activist, and she's also co-founder Nihaldul Qulub Indonesia or NQI Foundation. So please welcome Mbak Riri and have a wonderful session and fruitful discussion.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Baira and Mas Farid. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Before I start? Okay.
That's
Yes.
very good.
Yes, wonderful. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good night, distinguished speaker and participant. I'm so thrilled and so excited to be part of this very wonderful conference. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Riri Hariro. I'm a gender and social inclusion activist here in Indonesia. And I should proudly mention that I'm a student of Dr. Loren Leberer, our speaker today at Ohio University, USA back then in 2008 until 2010. And of course, that I'm now still consider myself as his student. So we are connected as what's so called here in Jakarta as OU Mafia or Ohio University Mafia. It's an honor for me to be part of the second annual Kartini Conference on Indonesian Feminism 2024, hosted by my best colleague, Mas Farid and Mbak Ira. They are really a great couple who inspired me a lot, especially for their consistency and also their dedicacy to advance gender and feminism discourse in Indonesia through their platform. Let's talk. Of course, this is not an easy way because Mas Farid and Mbak Ira is really special person. They are PhD student, which is, of course, it's not easy to be PhD student, but they are still have so much energy to educate people about gender diversity through their platform. So let's give them appreciation through the emoticon in your screen, our participant. Okay. Okay. So we are about to start our special panel today, discussing about the very important issue. The topic is really close to my heart, and also many people around the globe nowadays, the occupied Palestine and feminist movement. But before I turn on the mic to the speaker, let me say a few words about this issue. So like many around the world, I'm emotionally drained every day watching live in social media the atrocities against Palestine in Gaza and of course occupied West Bank, one tragedy after another tragedy. Their suffering is really unbearable. The plight of Palestinian women and children is unimaginable for all of us in Indonesia. The starvation, the killing, the indiscriminate bombardment, which according to the UN Women, 70% of the victims are actually women and also children. But beyond this physical and emotional exhaustion, I'm also consumed by deep anger and also profound disappointment, especially toward international organizations and to some feminists who appear completely disinterested in the plight and also suffering of women and children in Gaza. Those silence is really sickening. I'm lost my moral compass when I see how actually many feminists that I admire, they didn't talk about this issue. So for me, as Indonesian feminist, resistance of oppression is a truly feminist act, regardless of their religion, their country, their gender, ethnicity, and so on. So by saying that, today we will learn from our distinguished speaker who have been outspoken on the issue for many years through their work and also activism. So let me introduce our distinguished speaker today. First is Dr. Loren Leberer, my lovely professor of Classic and Religious Studies, Ohio University, Athens. He is the author of Identity and Religion in Palestine and also Palestine, Chicago. Dr. Loren have taught me a lot about this issue back then when I was a graduate student in Ohio. And the second one is Nida Tayem. She is a Palestinian scholar, temporary faculty and Ph.D. candidate in English Literature and Criticism, Indiana University of Pennsylvania. And the third one, Dr. Dina Siddiqui, Clinical Associate Professor, Global Liberal Studies, New York University, USA, affiliated faculty, Hagub Kevorkian Center for Near Eastern Studies, New York University, and also affiliated faculty, New York University, Abu Dhabi. Welcome, Dr. Dina. And the last one is also my colleague. I really admire her for her prolific works, especially with her new novels. Dr. Intan Paramaditha, she is an Indonesian feminist. She is the founder of the School of Women Thought, or Sekolah Pemikiran Perempuan, and she is also professor of Macquarie University, Sidney. So I'm welcoming all of our distinguished speaker in this conference. Okay, without further ado, because we have a limited time, so I will turn on the screen to Dr. Loren Lybarger for the first presentation. But before that, just to remind you that each speaker will give a 15-minute presentation, because later we will have enough time for Q&A session. And for the participant in this conference, feel free to drop your comment or question in the Q&A box. You can write in Bahasa and English, and later on we will read and also respond toward your comment and also question. So please, Dr. Loren Lybarger, I turn the screen to you. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much. Thank you so much, Riri. I wish to begin by first saying that I'm at a university that was initially settled and developed during the Adina Hopewell in Fort Ancient eras. This was the home of the Mingo, Erie, Wyandotte, and Miami people, as well as the Shawnee people and many other peoples. In 1795, after at least a decade of war with the United States, leaders from a dozen sovereign nations were forced to sign the Treaty of Greenville, which ceded lands comprising most of eastern, southern, and central Ohio to the US government. A confederacy of tribes united under the great Shawnee leader Tecumseh continued to resist US aggression until 1815, when they were eventually forced from Ohio, including lands currently occupied by Athens, Ohio University. Many Shawnee, meanwhile, remained on reservation land in Ohio until 1831, when they were finally compelled to immigrate to Native American territories west of the Mississippi River. The final Ohio tribe to be removed was the Wyandotte in 1843. Still, 200 years later, people from a broad array of indigenous cultures continue to call this land home and have contributed significantly to the local, national, and international study of the humanities at Ohio University. So I begin with that recognition, and I want, first of all, to greet all of you. Assalamu alaikum, wa nasal khair, wa sabah al khair. It's wonderful to be here. I wish only that I could speak to you in Indonesian. So I'm grateful to all of you for humoring me in English and for inviting me to be here. I'm grateful to be here among friends, including former students who have made important contributions across many fields. I wish to express my special thanks to Farid Mutaqin and to Riri Khariro for inviting me to join this panel. Farid and Riri, you are brilliant former students of mine, and I remain forever indebted to you for helping me understand the important debates among Muslim feminists in Indonesia. I'm grateful that we have remained in touch. I'm grateful to be here. As we all know, we come together today amid a brutal Israeli military onslaught that has destroyed almost the entire Gaza Strip and indiscriminately killed at least 38,000 people. The casualty numbers most certainly fail to describe the real loss of life. So many have perished and disappeared beneath the rubble, and thousands, children especially, have died from the lack of access to basic medical care and food. The intentional wholesale demolition of basic infrastructure with the aid of US supply 2000 JDAM bombs, and cultural institutions, as well as the forced displacement of nearly the entire population of more than 2 million people, have rendered the possibility of returning to any semblance of a coherent, sustainable society almost impossible in the near and immediate terms. Given the open public statements of key settler-linked ministers, such as Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, we must wonder to what extent a goal to ethnically cleanse Gaza and the West Bank isn't driving Israeli actions alongside whatever military goals might be at play. It is with good reason that International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court are now examining the possibility of war crimes and genocidal action in Gaza. The actions of Hamas on October 7th, 2023 are also receiving the same scrutiny in the ICJ and ICC, but we need to be clear that Hamas's actions in no way provide justification for the scale of Israel's assault on the entire population and society in Gaza. It is easy in this moment to forget how the Gaza Strip came into existence originally, and how Palestinians in Gaza have forged lives amid an unending succession of wars, occupations, uprisings, and sieges. Although it has served as a site of ancient human settlement and trade, the modern-day Gaza Strip came into existence as a consequence of the War of 1948. This war, which culminated decades of British colonial rule, support for Zionism, and repression of Palestinian nationalist resistance, saw the mass displacement and wholesale expulsion of nearly 750,000 Palestinians from their ancestral towns, villages, and farms. As they fled massacre, fighting, and threats of ethnic cleansing, these Palestinians sought protection and shelter in border areas, for example, in Lebanon and Syria to the north, Jordan to the east, and in the zone, then under Egyptian military control, that came to be known as the Gaza Strip. Fully expecting to return to their lands and properties after the war, the refugees would end up living in UN-supported camps that over time became permanent. Host countries refused to make the refugees citizens. What became the Palestine Liberation Organization also sought to prevent integration of the refugees. Emphasizing the right of return as enshrined in UN General Assembly resolutions, the PLO and host countries demanded that Israel repatriate the refugees. Israel, however, steadfastly refused to do so, and it was this refusal that effectively solidified the ethnic cleansing of 1948. Israel's interest in preventing a reversal of the events of 1948 lay most obviously in the Zionist commitment to creating a Jewish majority, something that had not existed, not even by a long shot, prior to the war. Through deliberate policy and from a Zionist perspective, fortuitous consequences of war, this population equation changed drastically, allowing Israel to form a majority Jewish state. Some Palestinians remained, however, within the new state. They would eventually come to account for, after receiving Israeli citizenship in 1966, for 20% of the current Israeli population. Immediately after the 1948 war, Palestinians came under a patchwork of legal and political regimes. In Gaza, for instance, Palestinians found themselves subject to Egyptian military rule. In the West Bank, by contrast, Jordan annexed the territory, including East Jerusalem, and extended citizenship to the refugees. Syria and Lebanon denied citizenship to the Palestinians who ended up in their territories and instead subjected them to special, oftentimes discriminatory regulations. Palestinians who remained within the new state of Israel also did not receive citizenship, at least not immediately. Instead, they found themselves contending with military rule and thereby living under a separate legal regime that did not apply to Jewish citizens of Israel. The scholar Rabia Ejbariya has recently adopted this term Nakba to describe the situation as an ongoing reality that fundamentally defines the experience of Palestinians globally. Palestinians have long used this word Nakba, which means catastrophe in Arabic, to refer to the 1948 war and its calamitous outcome for them. Ejbariya adopts this term to capture how forced dispersion creates and perpetuates a fragmented reality that subjects Palestinians to multiple overlapping and often conflicting legal regimes at every level, from the local to the international. He proposes the term as a distinct legal category, similar to but differing in important ways from the concept of apartheid. Professor Nadia Hajj and I have recently drawn on Ejbariya's insights to examine how, despite these conditions of fragmentation, Palestinians have nevertheless created narratives that reconstitute and reinforce a shared sense of identity across space and time. We're hoping to publish these findings very soon. We've submitted our publication and are waiting for a decision on it. As we point out, the most prominent types of Palestinian narratives that people across the world know about include the nationalist ones, through which the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, and Hamas have in different and contradictory ways contested Zionist claims and reasserted Palestinian rights and attachment to the land of Palestine. Nadia and I, however, emphasize other subnational and transnational Palestinian narratives that have been equally important to Palestinians, but do not necessarily track with the prevailing nationalist discourses or with the anti-Palestinian ones, emphasizing the terrorism trope. We don't deny or minimize the importance of the national narrative. Rather, we argue that these narratives do not capture the entirety of how Palestinians see themselves and have created and sustained a sense of social coherence, despite the conditions of Nakba that have so powerfully defined their lives. I'd like to describe some examples of what Nadia and I mean, and in doing so, provide context for issues of concern to feminists who stand in solidarity with Palestinians. My first example comes from my experience of living in the West Bank and Gaza Strip from 1986 to 1989, and then from 1991 to 1993, respectively, and then returning to do field work in these same areas from 1999 to 2000. Beginning during that first stint, those years during the mid to late 1980s, which included the initial years of the first Intifada, I became friends with a family in a refugee camp in the Gaza Strip. I visited them occasionally, managing to do so even during the Intifada. Later, when I moved to the Gaza Strip to work as an English teacher in 1991, I saw a lot of my friends, sons of a father and mother who had fled their southern Palestinian village of Al-Barqa in 1948. My friends continued to live in the cramped quarter of one of the most densely populated spaces I have ever encountered. The two men I was closest with supported Fatah and the Popular Front factions. During the first Intifada, the military arrested one of these brothers in a random sweep. Israel detained thousands of men in this way, never charging them with a formal offense and never bringing them before a judge. Instead, they were consigned to the desert tent prison in the Negev desert on the renewable 6-month detention order. Later, my friend would recount how none of the political factions inquired after or supported his family in his absence. The experience embittered him toward factional politics. It marked the beginning of his alienation from the factions and his retreat into an independent status. At the same time, Hamas has emerged as a powerful religious and political force that contested the hegemony of the PLO factions. The tension between the Islamists and secularists camps predated the Intifada, of course. Already during the early 1980s, the Muslim Brotherhood had become a resented presence in the camps as their activists would go about attempting to impose their version of piety on people they deemed to be acting in inappropriate ways in public. Palestinians had come to view the Islamists as possible collaborators with the Israeli military. Not everyone, of course, but many did, because they refused to get involved in the nationalist resistance. That changed with the emergence of Hamas, which took a strong resistance stance against Israel, but Hamas also continued the policy of openly contesting the leadership of the secular nationalists. The secularist Islamist tensions deepened as a result. These tensions manifested in a very intimate way among my friends. Within their family, the younger brother had gravitated toward the Muslim Brotherhood, attending their mosques and becoming deeply pious in the ways that the Brotherhood promoted. In 1990 or 1991, this brother got married to the daughter of a prominent Hamas leader. His fiancée projected the image of a female virtuoso of piety. She did so by wearing the hijab, the jilbab, and the niqab face mask, ostentatiously refusing to be in the company of any man who was not a mahram, and most controversially for the family, demanding that the younger brother, her betrothed, build a wall down the center of the cramped family dwelling so that she could live separately from them with her husband-to-be. This demand angered the middle brother, the one who had served the 6-month administrative detention order in the Negev, and as a result became deeply angry toward all the factions. Quote, "He thinks he's better, more moral than the rest of us," my friend complained bitterly to me about his pious brother. But he has placed his wife above the family, above his brothers, he went on to say to me. My friend contrasted this behavior of his brother and his new wife with the relationship he had with a friend who owned a sewing workshop. The workshop produced jeans with brand labels for the Israeli market. My friend told me that whenever his kids needed clothes for the new school year, he would tell this person, his neighbor, and he would make them without asking for a shekel in return. As compensation, my friend would do electrical work for this neighbor whenever he needed help with repair. My friend described this ethic of general reciprocity as rooted in the adat wa taqlid, the customs and traditions that had organized village life before the 1948 war and continued to structure the relationship of neighbors and families. This was the authentic ethic of Palestinians, my friend insisted. The factions, including Hamas, with all their pretensions about religion, fundamentally violated this brotherly and neighborly ethic in the pursuit of political self-interest, moral arrogance, and demands for allegiance in return for favors. As far as my friend was concerned, the attitude and actions of his brother and his new wife toward my friend's family amounted to little more than hypocrisy that undermines social and familial unity. Now, the point I want to make in this example is that other moral frameworks can come to the fore for Palestinians as they grapple with the experience of fracture and fragmentation, and in this case, fracture within a family. The secularist and Islamist movements have attempted to reknit and reinforce Palestinian unity by stressing national and religious solidarity. In doing so, however, they have just as often produced division, including at the micro level of families. In this situation, we see an appeal to the customs and traditions that ground an ethic of general reciprocity as an alternative framework for social morality and social cohesion. This appeal remains as patriarchal as in the Islamist and nationalist ones. The customs and traditions assume the priority and authority of fathers and brothers. The same has been true of Palestinian nationalist and Islamist discourses. Ironically and significantly, the woman my brother's friend married can be seen as acting within the constraints of Islamist ideology to assert the authority and create a space of autonomy for herself. In this sense, gender segregation as a moral and social norm within the Islamist framework serves to empower her. She mobilizes this norm and its putative religious grounding against the family and its customs and traditions. In response, my friend points to how this assertion of independence by this woman undermines the ethic of family and brotherly solidarity. Now, I don't know how much time I have, really. I have more to say here, but I can stop here if we need to move on. Riori, should I go ahead and continue?
Yes, you can go ahead. Maybe you can wrap up like for 2 minutes more, Dr. Loren.
Okay.
If you can do that. Yes,
so
sure.
I was going to describe another example of a young woman, a Christian, who converted to Islam during the Second Intifada. She actually converted when she came to Chicago, and she did so because she had become quite alienated toward her Christian family and her Christian community. And especially in Chicago, as Christians were reacting to attacks on Christian communities in Iraq during the Islamic State period, they began to really isolate themselves into their confessional identities. And this person, I call her Layla, rejected this. She cared deeply about Palestine and was really drawn to Islam. Talked about how listening to the Quran calmed her and made her feel a connection to Palestine. She also admired Muslims for their dedication to the resistance. This was at the time when Hamas really emerged as the forerunner and at the forefront of Palestinian resistance against Israel, sometimes through the use of human bombing, but nevertheless, really had held on to the armed resistance. And this really inspired a lot of young activists at the time, including this person, Layla. But what was interesting to me was that in Chicago, she encountered a community that really had embraced a kind of conservative Muslim Brotherhood piety. And she felt very alienated from this. She herself was an artist. She shaved her head in a kind of punk style and had tattoos. And she felt like she was not being taken seriously as a Muslim. In any way, she felt alienated as a woman as well. And she felt that the sheikhs and the imams were talking to Muslims as if they, and in her words, as if they were cattle. And she really rejected this. She was drawn, however, through Bosnian friends into the circle of a white professor who was a convert to Islam and a Sufi, and discovered a kind of spirituality there that really attracted her. In the end, she stopped really praying and stopped really identifying herself primarily as a Muslim, although she continued to hold on to Islam as part of her spirituality. I want to end with something that she said, as she contended with the aftermath of the Second Intifada, which had been horribly violent, and the constant bombardments of the Gaza Strip, from 2005 onward. And she said this, and she talked about how she had developed these friendships with Jews, Jewish activists, anti-Zionist Jewish activists. And she said, I do open my heart. I can see a human being in front of me and not a label or a flag. Part of my soul is just so tired of all this nationalism and blood. Maybe this is one blessing this country, she was speaking about the United States, gave to me. I mean, she was quite critical of the United States too. But she said, it is a blessing that I'm not judged here for having the sides of my head shaved so that I can look at a human being, and that I can look at a human being and judge them by their character and not by what they are wearing, whether they are wearing hijab or whether they're covered in tattoos. Not everyone thinks the way I do, but this country, this city, Chicago, gave me the room to do so, the room to be an individual. Okay, I've exceeded my time. Thank you for your patience. I'll end with this last statement from Layla, gesturing beyond the nation to a vision of coexistence that seems an impossibility in this present moment. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, because they mute my mic, so it takes time. Okay, sorry, no problem. Thank you very much, Dr. Loren, for your very comprehensive presentation. I hope that maybe you can share your presentation for the audience, because maybe not all of them can really understand about what you have, so many important issues that you cover in this presentation. So basically, Dr. Loren Lybarger highlight some very important issue. The first one, that the Gaza issue or the Palestinian issue is really complicated because the conflicts happen for so long, and there is also contentious narrative between national liberation and also freedom and also Islamic discourse, especially brought by some Islamist group in the Palestine, and it's also create the question of identity among Palestine who live both in the Palestine and also in outside the country. So if you have any question toward what Dr. Lybarger said, so please feel free to drop any comment and also question in the Q&A box. So thank you, Dr. Lybarger. Thank you so much for your very comprehensive presentation. So I would like to call our second speaker, Dr. Nida Tayim. Is here already?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, Nida. Thank you very much for your coming in this conference. So I would like to turn mic over to you for 15 minutes presentation. Well, please feel free if you want to share your slide, if you prepare for that.
Yeah, sure, I will do that. Thank you, and I would like to start by expressing my gratitude for this. It's such an honor to be considered as part of this distinguished gathering, and it perfectly aligns with my personal interest and also my academic research. So I like to start by saying that the greatest pride I have is being a Palestinian woman of a Palestinian descent. Almost 9 months into the war on Gaza, we see that over than 10,000 women have been killed Among them, we see that an estimated of more than 6,000 mothers leaving over than 19,000 children orphaned, and that's according to the UN Women latest gender alert. The report also adds that more than 1 million Palestinian women and girls in Gaza have almost no access to food, no safe water, with diseases growing amidst their inhumane living conditions. In Gaza, women are primarily the primary caregivers for most of the Palestinian families, and they are now facing the most first-hand and long-term consequences of the devastation of life. They are all living with consequences as well, of consequences of psychological impacts and trauma due to the lack of services, food, school, places of worship, universities, and all of these difficult and burdens mostly carried by women. Unfortunately, we are also living in this world that requires from us to urge for Palestinian rights and to exist. It's sad to witness a world that perpetuates and supports the denial of basic needs for safety for Palestinian women. The question that I want to ask, how can we be truly feminist if we don't stand in solidarity with Palestinian women? Palestinian women deserve a place to live and to live safely. They deserve sanitation, they deserve freedom. Like any woman, Palestinian women deserve to live in a place that they can call home, and they deserve a future. I would like to share my screen a little bit, if you don't mind, to present or start with my presentation. Just 1 second. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so for my presentation, I'd like to address feminism in Palestine from an ecofeminist perspective. I'm going to briefly discuss some introduction to ecofeminism in general, which is basically a theory that I'm approaching and using for my work and my research. In order to understand the relationship between ecofeminism and in the Palestinian context, I'm going also to address the idea of settler colonialism and its impact on culture, and also some relationship in between ecofeminism in Palestinian literature in specific. And for today, I'm just going to briefly address Susan Abu Hawa's novel Against the Loveless Word, for the sake of the time. I may not be able to cover all that, but so to start with, ecofeminism as a movement, it's a philosophy and a movement that sees connection between exploitation of women and nature, and also oppression of women. This movement argues for the need to replace dichotomies of separation with a framework of interconnectedness and interrelatedness. As notably described by King, it's a worldwide movement that is rooted in a shared interest and embracing of opposing any sort of domination and violence against women and the environment. The primary emphasis of this theory lies in the examination of injustices inflicted against women in their specific location and the environment. In ecofeminism, Vandana Shiva and Marie Mies highlight the role of structures of power, including settler colonialism in their establishment and perpetuation, and the subjugation of nature, women, and indigenous people and their land. Consequently, the system of domination appeared to bear a considerable degree of accountability for the oppression of women and the exploitation of nature simultaneously. Some of the key principles of ecofeminism is interconnectedness and the non-violence and appreciation of life. So to understand the relationship between ecofeminism in the Palestinian context, I'll start by explaining ecological imperialism and in-settler colonialism, specifically in Palestine, and how this ideology has allowed occupation to happen in the first place. So within the context of Palestine in the Middle East, ecological imperialism is exemplified in the consequences resulting from multiple dominations and the exercise of domination and colonization over the ecosystem of the region. Palestine has seen notable environmental and demographic transformation and destructiveness from war and settler colonialism, but it's only over the last century that these changes have acquired a more drastic ecological nature. The most well-known of these alterations is the displacement of the native inhabitants, which culminated between 1948 and 1967. Over the course of this period, Zionism demolished a total of 200 villages, leading to the emergence of the biggest influx of refugees since the Second World War. Zionism and Zionist settler colonialism in Palestine may be seen as a significant ecological disruption struggle, as argued by Martinez earlier, before 1948 and before the Zionist Congress of 1897. Palestine was home to around 1,300 villages and cities, each inhabited by a modest and controllable population living in harmony with the environment. In 1967, the Zionist regime seized control of the remaining 22% of historic Palestine, namely Gaza and the West Bank, and preoccupied and proceeded to establish settlements in these occupied areas, which is against international law as stated in the Fourth Geneva Convention. So by focusing on the Palestinian historical inquiry, it's possible to recognize the origins of settler colonial ideology within the Enlightenment era and subsequent European thoughts associated with the concept of modernity or progress. The settler colonial culture imagination had figuratively colonized Palestine far before the British Mandate period. The indigenous population, despite their existence, was not recognized as the rightful inhabitants of the land. They have been seen as inferior, and therefore the exploitation of the Palestinians and their labor are justified. Moreover, Palestine has been constructed as an articulation of the notion of nobody's land in mainstream narratives. Under this myth, a land that is not managed in a modern way means that it's not ripe and it's ready for conquer. This ideology played a key role in legitimizing the eradication of local people and the confiscation of land. While promoted as a desert or a land without a people, for a people without a land, the greenwashing environmental project, which has been propagated as an environmentally friendly mission to make the desert bloom, steadily and slowly goes unrecognized as violent at all, distracting attention from its non-spectacular or non-grotesque damaging effect on ecology, woman, and life. This imposition of external control resulted in the marginalization of also Palestinian customs, traditions, and led to their detachment from local and cultural ties. In other words, we can say that Palestine have been imagined under imperial and settler colonial thinking between two binaries, either as being a utopian place, a pure, pristine, divine, Edenic-like, holy, or a dark place, empty, savage, corrupt, barbaric, or terrorist. This is, or can be seen lately with like Hamas and this image of them being terrorists rather than a group resisting occupation. Now, when it comes to literature and the representation of land, trees, and the aspects of the feminist movement in literature, we see that there is a flow of academic and scholarly writers on Palestine who have emerged and who have used land and trees as the dominant motive to occupy the imaginary space, and as expressed in novel writing and poetry by many nationalist writers. And we see that the word land, homeland, image of nature become among the main expressions that feature not only national belonging, but also draws attention to the environment and environmental consciousness. Palestinian women writers recognize the significance of writing in relation to their anti-colonial efforts, and they saw that there is this inherent connection between the act of writing and the development of their commitment and conscious and dedication. Before I go to the novel, I also want to draw attention to another connection that we can maybe talk a little bit more about with the forced displacement and its severe impact and harmful impact on Palestinian women and Palestinians in general. So the forced displacement and has altered the relationship with nature in Palestine. It has also not only complicated the struggle for self-determination, but also influenced the themes and the narratives found in many of the Palestinian writings. For most Palestinians, the experience of colonialism included more than simply political subjugation and the denial of their rights to self-determination. It also entailed a profound degradation of ecology, life, and humanity. The policies implemented by both the British Mandate and Zionists and the confiscation of land by the Zionists had a determinal effect on their means of living, and has also and prospects of attaining a respectable standards of living for Palestinians. Settlements in the West Bank Wall, the military buffer zones have also caused significant harm to Palestinian agriculture fields and hindered people's ability to reach their olive trees. This may disrupt environmental rural way of living. And the picture we see also resonates with the Chipko movement, and also their dedication to protect nature and to protect trees and forests as well. Now for the novel that I analyze, I look into Susan Abulhawa's Against the Loveless Word from an eco-feminist perspective. This is her recent novel, Against the Loveless World. It's an illustration of the violence of othering in a warming world, to use Naomi Kellen's term. In this novel, Abulhawa highlights the intensifying Palestinian and regional climate and water crisis in the Middle East. It's a region now known for its dry climate, limited water resources, while situated among various locations in the Middle East. This novel also follows the ongoing displacement of Nahr, meaning river in Arabic, a determined yet shattered woman who has lived in multiple locations, including Kuwait, Iraq, Jordan, and Palestine during the Gulf War and Iraq War, to shed light on the complex forces that constantly displaced and violated her. Abulhawa complicates the simplistic representation of woman, or the woman as a land, or woman as motherland, and shows how the woman, rather than accepting patriarchal and dominating behavioral norms, to show that it's involved along with all inhabitants in the liberation project, to demonstrate also an environmental consciousness. The protagonist, Nahr's narrative, emerges in the context of both state and patriarchal oppression, first by the state and then by social norms favoring men. After coming back, she confronts violence, chaos, and uncertainty concerning her sense of place and future opportunities, without the possibility of going back to Kuwait and no available home in Amman or even anywhere else. Abulhawa also questions the dominant portrayal of the liberation movement as male-dominated by using Nahr's experience to emphasize the marginalization of women in their active involvement in the fight for liberation. Her experience and imprisonment, her experience with armed struggle, military interference, and sexual assault also highlight the interconnectedness nature of subjugation with settler colonialism and patriarchy, revealing the complex obstacle confronted by displaced Palestinian women. I can stop here, and I'm not sure if I still have time, but if not, I think I can wrap up.
Yeah, Dr. Nida Tayem, please, you can wrap up for maybe like 30 seconds or 1 minute, please.
Yeah. Yes, sure. So in the context of the war and settler coloniality, I look into the depiction of, or the image of, woman's body in this novel, and think of it not only as a space that is constructed as a land trope in which the settler colonial militarism or war, and also capitalist patriarchy exert a pervasive and often violent influence on women and also the land. I look into the female protagonist depiction beyond that, given the fact that in settler colonialism context, women's bodies are definitely portrayed as a land for to defy colonialism, and also to confirm like how ecological imperialism can affect both woman and nature simultaneously. So woman's body becomes the metaphorical or a battleground manufactured by wars in a settler colonial geography, where like all these factors become inseparable and cannot be separated. Yeah, so I think.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nida Tayim. I think your presentation is really fresh because most, from my limited understanding, that not many discourse actually talk about the occupation of Palestine in the context of ecofeminism. So I think this is really an eye opener for us to dig in the issue from the perspective of ecofeminism. So I'm really thrilled with your presentation, and I hope that also many participants here want to learn more about the issue. So thank you very much for your presentation, and I hope that you can share also your presentation for the audience later. Thank you very much. So, okay, and I will turn the screen also to the third speaker, Dr. Dina Siddiqui. And Dr. Dina will talk about why should the crisis in Palestine right now consider as feminist issue, and how as feminist, like global feminist movement actually respond and, you know, take action toward this crisis. So please, Dr. Dina, time is yours.
Thank you. You can hear me. Okay. Just going to start my timer here. Thank you, Farid. Thank you, moderator. Thanks for putting this together and for inviting me. I am not part of the OU mafia. And also, this is not my I'm having in this language. Is that okay? Okay. I'm not, this is not part of my academic research, but I think just as a feminist, I found it really important to act around this. And as somebody who lives, unfortunately, in the US and whose tax dollars are going to buying 200-pound bombs or whatever, it's a very distressing situation to be in. I just want to start with some statistics. We heard some a little bit before. I couldn't find out how many days it's been today. I think we've all stopped counting. There was a time when I knew 52 days, you know, 68 days, but it's over 200 days. But since October 7th, just over, you know, around 40,000 people killed, more than 15,000 children, 86,000 at least injured, many more missing under the rubble, but every hour in Gaza, and these figures are from Al Jazeera's. Al Jazeera has a very nice war and maps and charts live tracker. I just looked at it a little while ago. 42 bombs dropped every hour, 12 buildings destroyed every hour, 15 people, including 6 children, killed every hour, 35 people injured. More than half of Gaza's homes destroyed or damaged, 80% of commercial facilities, 88% school buildings, hospitals barely functioning, ambulances destroyed, 267 places of worship, all of that, and it goes on and on and on. A UN special committee appointed by the General Assembly said it was horrified by violations against Palestinians in Israeli custody, and that's really gone up, right, since October 7th. Engaged in Israeli soldiers, engaged in dehumanizing, cruel, and humiliating behavior, right? If we've been following alternative media, we will all have seen these endlessly horrific, unimaginably cruel, and obscene images from the Israeli occupying forces, from the slow and calculated murder of 6-year-old Hind Rajab to the latest outrage yesterday, which I saw a video of the IOF setting vicious dogs on a 68-year-old woman. And there's more and more. In addition to the enforced starvation, the lack of supplies, water, medicine, anesthesia, everything. But we've also seen the complete denial of genocide. In fact, active moral support extended by Euro-American governments and the mainstream press and corporations. And this includes, in some cases, feminists, mainstream liberal feminists. Of course, at the same time, I'm sitting here in New York City. Any resistance in the US is violently suppressed or at least censored. At NYU, students and professors were arrested, right? Speech on Palestine is criminalized. If you talk, you're smeared as anti-Semitic. But this is testament to the power of narratives, as well as to the power of money. And what I think that feminists really need to tackle today, those of us who are not on the front lines in that sense, but especially those of us who are academics, but not only those of us, who are academics, is to really confront the narrative and the way in which certain Orientalist and civilizational narratives of modernity continue to endure. They're not going away. There is, so the question many of us are asking is, what can we do in the face of this live stream genocide, 8 months, and the powerlessness just seems to increase? What do we do when the authority of the ICJ and the ICC is flaunted, not just by Israel, but with full unconditional support from its Euro-American sponsors? And the horror show goes on. What should feminists in the global South do? And I'm counting myself as someone from Bangladesh, about our responsibilities and obligations. Our countries may or may not be supporting, most of them are not supporting Israel openly, but they are part of a larger global system, a system in which a post-colonial or neo-colonial system in which it's easy to manipulate national sovereignties, right? So I think it's in this background, I want to address very quickly 3 questions in the 8 minutes I have, or 9 minutes. Why should feminists care about Palestine? Why is the genocide or a feminist issue? Other than just being ethical human beings, why should we care? The second thing is, how do we deal with the problem of the appropriation of feminist and queer rights discourses, pinkwashing, for instance, in relation specifically to the rape accusations against Hamas in the October 7th attacks? And third, and this is the hardest thing, how do we forge meaningful solidarity at this very difficult time? I think it's very important to center Palestinian voices, feminist voices on principle, but they're also in the best position to shed light on everything that's obscured by mainstream media and mainstream scholarship. and liberal feminist discourses. So I've taken a lot of what I know is from the Palestinian Feminist Collective, which is an online, Palestinian Americans have an online resource and a toolkit. So much of my understanding comes from that, other than just reading all these amazing articles that have come out. But I've also learned from Palestinian friends and colleagues, people like Nadra Shalhoub Kevorki and Rima Hamami and Rabab Abdul Hadi, right? All of whom have taught through their scholarship and activism that for feminists, surely there are no lines between scholarship and activism. They have to feed into each other. Feminism can't separate theory from practice. So why should feminists care about Palestine? The Combahee River Collective, which was a Black lesbian collective in the 1970s, said quite famously that until Black women are free, no one in the US will be free. In other words, their all our lives are interconnected through histories of colonialism and slavery. So the white privilege of white women of various classes relied on the constant dehumanization and extraction of labor of Black bodies. And I think we can say today, I would rephrase that and say, until Palestinian women are free, none of us are free. What the genocide has clarified, at least for me, is how the global system works. Who is going to be considered human? Which bodies will be considered to have value, and which bodies are going to be disposed of, right? Because so who will have access to this thing called human rights? Who is going to be? So, and this is where I think the thing on violence against women becomes really interesting. I think the live streaming of genocide has made it impossible for us to realize how interconnected, not just how interconnected the world is, but the way in which the current imperialist capitalist order, underpinned by very healthy doses of Orientalism, are central to maintaining hegemony, but a settler colonialism. So the muzzling of the media, the criminalization, the flaunting of international law, it's serving multiple interests. And within all of that, gender and sexuality are deeply implicated, right? This is where I think, the genocide has prompted us once to ask again, what counts as a feminist issue? Because there's a sense that somehow feminism, for liberal feminism, it's about child marriage. It's about domestic violence. It's about, and of course, it's about the bad men in the global South, particularly Arab Muslim men who are keeping women down. And I have lots of examples, which I won't go into, but I will talk about it later. But there's something called colonial feminism, so that when it comes to women in Palestine, discourses, there's the discourse of liberating women to justify invasions. We know all about that, military occupations is there. It becomes colonial feminism, in the words of Nida Elia, I think, depicts Palestinian women as helpless victims. Their problem is just Palestinian men. And when you have, they're disposable and threatening, but they're also, it helps the way in which Palestinian men, Israel is seen as Western, modern, and civilized. Palestinians are seen as backwards, and Palestinian men are seen as misogynist. So then the fear of Hamas becomes a kind of bogeyman, right? So Palestinian women's freedom of movement, their right to education, their right to vote, to work, to live where they want, all of that are actually denied to them, as Nida Elia says, not by their fellow Palestinians, but by the illegal occupying power, Israel. But liberal feminism will always focus on dress codes, on the hijab, on the outward trappings of so-called emancipation, on Islamic fundamentalism, so to speak, right? This is a very, very big problem. And of course, part of two,
Ini merupakan persoalan yang besar.
Sorry. I think I heard, okay. But the second thing is that the settler colonial project is driven by demographic anxiety. So
Yang kedua adalah proyek yang dilakukan oleh orang-orang Israel.
Palestinian women's bodies, sexualities, and reproductive capacities
dan
are seen
mereka
as
juga
security
melakukan
threats. Women
penindakan
aren't supposed to have
terhadap
babies, you know. They're meant to, you know,
Palestina terkait dengan
there's a
tubuhnya,
way in
terkait
which, in
dengan
fact, they are
seksualitas.
constantly being policed. They have to, it becomes very important to, I'm sorry, I'm hearing
Dan
things
mereka
that
dengan
I need
dominasi patriarkinya
to turn the,
menyerang perempuan-perempuan Palestina ini.
let me turn my thing off because I have.
Yeah, I think the interpreter, please help with the interpreter mic.
Okay, I'm just, I think.
Go ahead, Dr. Dina. Yeah.
I'm sorry, it was just getting very distracted. I do want to say that there is, you know, there's been a lot of focus on controlling Palestinian sexualities and Palestinian women, but there's a recent report, and two things about this. Right now, Palestinian women are saying there's reproductive genocide in Palestine because of the way in which mothers have to deliver their babies without anesthesia, even during cesareans, doctors using flashlights to conduct operations, women and girls of reproductive age forced to take pills to stop their menstrual flow, and it goes on and on. So this is what the Palestinian Feminist Collective calls reproductive genocide. But there's something else. There's a, you know, if you look at there's a logic of preemption in the kind of killing of Palestinians, stopping Palestinians from reproducing, if you will, from having conditions in which they can have families. Is that here is, and I'll explain, this also explains the excess of cruelty, the kind of normalization by liberal feminists and others. I'm going to read two quotes, one from Mordechai Kedar, an Israeli military intelligence officer, who in 2014 said, it would be good to rape the wives and mothers of Palestinian combatants because it would deter attacks by Hamas militants. An Israeli lawmaker, Ayelet Shaked, around the same time in 2015, openly called for the murder of Palestinian children and their mothers, asserting that Palestinian women must be killed because they give birth to little snakes. And this is what other people have called the logic of preemption at work. You have to get rid of people before they're even born, or you have to get rid of little boys before they can become these little snakes or little vipers, right? This is the racialized logic of elimination on which settler colonialism depends. I'm going to wrap up with just 2 points one is about men. We don't talk about, there's a lot of talk about women as victims and children of victims, but Palestinian men, even in the sort of liberal media narratives, are never thought of. You know, they are already dehumanized. This trope of women and children not only, like, you know, thingifies Palestinian women, but the male Palestinian body and the male Arab body is always either less lustful, already dangerous. So it makes the male body hyper killable in that sense. Because they're already guilty of doing something if they're allowed to live. So you have to kill them off. So all of these logics work. And I think the question, and I'm sure I don't have any more time, but is this whole trying to pin on Hamas something they didn't do, which was this extreme sexual violence. Why it's been so successful and enduring, despite the fact that there is no proof, is really interesting to think about. And I think there's in the Euro-American imagination, a feminist liberal imagination too, this idea of Muslims as rapists, idea of men as Muslim men, Palestinian men as violent and rapists really helps to do that. I didn't get to my third question, but I'd be very happy to talk more about what's happening right now in the US, because what's happening in the US actually very actively, obviously, determines what happens elsewhere. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dina. I think you explained very well about the double standard of Western liberal feminism in portraying and responding the crisis in Palestine, and it's really sickening seeing those kind of domination and also false narrative that have been perpetuated again and again, whether in Western media or in any other scholarship that happen. And I really agree with you that actually there is no separation between feminist scholarship and also activism. I think this one is really also important here in the context of Indonesia. Mm-hmm. So I will turn and I will call my colleague, Dr. Intan, as a fourth speaker for this session. So I think Dr. Intan will speak about how actually this issue can be responded in the feminist movement in Indonesia. So welcome, Mbak Intan. Thank you very much for joining us today. So as other speaker, you have a 15-minute presentation, and I turn over to you.
Thank you very much, Mbak Riri. Yes, thank you to Let's Talk and Conde for inviting me to this very important panel. And first of all, I'm aware that a discussion of Palestine is always a discussion of land, the history and ownership of it, and the identity of people connected to it. So I would like to begin by acknowledging my position as an Indonesian living in Australia. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Gadigal land of the Era people, and I pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So what does it mean to express our solidarity for Palestine as non-Palestinians? I'm here to share my observation about the support for Palestine in Indonesia and what we can do as someone who's been involved in a feminist collective in the country. The Indonesian context is unique, unlike in the US or countries such as Australia, where people could face the risk of being detained for showing their support for Palestine, and denial of genocide is ongoing. The support for Palestine in Indonesia is not marginal. It is, in fact, the dominant stance. But it doesn't mean that it has no problems. And this is what we hope to talk about today. The discourse of Palestine in Indonesia has always been closely tied to religion. It has even become the site of contestation between different Islamic groups to articulate their Muslimness. What is often missing from the dominant discourse of Palestine in Indonesia is the analysis of settler colonialism, which is always interwoven with race, gender, and capitalism. The absence of this analysis has produced glaring contradiction and inconsistencies. For example, while the majority of Indonesians claim to support Palestine, there's a failure to recognize that the situation in West Papua is also a form of settler colonialism and military oppression. We need to ask ourselves, what framework are we using when we view Palestine and express our solidarity? Perhaps our solidarity is limited by certain identity politics, or perhaps we view Palestine through the lens of universal humanism, reducing the complexity of the issue to narratives of suffering and victimization. These forms of solidarity can be impactful, but they are not sustainable because they do not address structural issues and how we are implicated. We need an analysis of settler colonialism, racism, imperialism, and capitalism, all of which are interconnected. And this kind of framework used it has been used actually by Global South and women of color feminisms to understand oppression. In other words, Palestine is a feminist issue. And I'm very happy to know that my presentation has some similarities with what Professor Dina Siddiqui has discussed. I'm very excited. I think it's really important to make more noise. So if you would allow me to just share my screen here. Okay. Okay, let me just, apologies. Okay. All right. Okay, so I will talk about the discourse of Palestine in Indonesia, and then I'll talk a bit about the feminist framework in viewing Palestine, and hopefully I can end with some reflective questions. So the support for Palestine in Indonesia has been dominated by ideas around the transnational Ummah, and Muslim organizations have mobilized pro-Palestine rallies for decades. In November 5th, 2023, nearly 2 million people gathered in Jakarta to express their solidarity with Palestine. The rally was led by the People's Alliance for Palestine, including the Indonesian Council of Ulama. Although Catholic, Protestant, Hindu, and Buddhist institutions were involved, Muslim visibility was very strong. Palestine has been seen as a way to reaffirm Muslim public identities, and the religious framework has several consequences, including the conflation between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, which has circulated through popular culture. There are also different approaches to Israel-Palestine relation. Let me just, okay. So for example, the late Abdurrahman Wahid, former president and leader of Nahdlatul Ulama, supported the Palestinian people, but also pushed for recognition for the state of Israel in the 1990s and early 2000s. A clip from the 90s showing Abdurrahman Wahid talking about Israel's right to exist has resurfaced on social media lately and appeared rather eerie considering the current horrors in Gaza. So his purpose back then was to prevent growing radicalism and anti-Semitism, but it lacked discussions around history, the Nakba, and ongoing colonialism. The reasons why Indonesia has never had diplomatic relations with Israel are rarely historicized. In 1948, rejection of acknowledging the state of Israel was an anti-colonial stance, and this was fully fledged in the 1955 Bandung Conference, an important landmark for decolonization and the collective Third World Solidarity movement. The term Nakba entered public conversations only recently due to social media content created by Palestinians in Palestine and the diaspora. And before this, Indonesian Muslims rarely historicized the establishment of the Zionist state, failing to delve into how colonialism and racism are implicated in the dispossession of Palestinians. Palestine occupies the place as a symbol for Muslim struggles, and therefore images of Palestinians as unjustly treated people persist. In the mid-2000s, the Prosperous Justice Party, or PKS, already displayed posters, the first image on top, of wounded Palestinian children with texts such as, save Palestinian children, and they organized charity nights for Palestinian children and women. This victimization narrative continues until today, and as Professor Siddiqui mentioned, this excludes the male Palestinians. So today, for instance, Indonesian celebrity Atta Halilintar organized donations for Palestine using the image of a Palestinian child who had just lost their parents. The caption read, If I could, I'd like to adopt a Palestinian child. If there is no way yet, let's help the way we can. So we can see the lens of universal humanism operating here, highlighting the narrative of child's suffering. In recent years, more secular forms of solidarity have emerged, exemplified by this rally in front of the US Embassy, organized by human rights NGO Contras and several musicians. People have started to introduce terms like decolonization into conversations, but this movement is still very small. So what I would like to propose or re-highlight here is that we need to interrogate the ways in which we express our solidarity with Palestine, and we need to view it through a feminist framework. Why feminism? This has been discussed as well. Sexual violence against Palestinian women is part of the Israeli occupation and oppression. The subjugation of Palestinians is often conveyed through gendered metaphors. So we've been, probably you've seen images of Israeli soldiers posing in front of the camera with Palestinian women's underwear. And this is a hideous, hideous performance that underlines the ability to access, to humiliate, and to assert control over the enemy. So these are all very important issues, but looking at Palestine with a feminist framework is not only about focusing on women. I think what we need to do is to push it as a paradigm shift. A feminist framework means that we dismantle the structures of oppression that implicate not only Palestinians, but also us, and that we see the interconnectedness of struggles. And this is a feminist way of thinking. And of course, as Mbak Riri has also mentioned, and others have mentioned as well, you know, mainstream feminism, glass ceiling, neoliberal feminism, they tend to remain silent with regards to Palestine. So I am not referring to any kind of feminism. I'm really specifically talking about feminism that is not only anti-patriarchal, but also anti-racist, anti-capitalist, and anti-colonial. For some, it is called decolonial feminism. But even before the decolonial turn, anti-racist, anti-colonial, and anti-capitalist forms of feminist resistance could be found through Black feminism, radical women of color feminism, third world feminism. Professor Siddiqui talked about the Kombahi River Collective. In the 70s, Nawal El-Saadawi in Egypt, Audre Lorde in the US, and Marianne Katopo in Indonesia shared a similar view, stating that a feminist struggle is also a struggle against racism, capitalism, and imperialism. Of course, you know, Angela Davis talked about women, race, and class, and here's from her book this is Freedom is a Constant Struggle, where she highlights the connection between Black Lives Matter and Palestine. So intersectionality is not just about bodies and experiences, it's also about intersectionality of struggles across national borders. So the key here is to dismantle the interwoven structures of oppression and view the interconnected struggles. So I would like to share an example here, how we are inspired by Global South and women of color feminisms. My collective Sekolah Pemikiran Perempuan, or the School of Women's Thought, organized a panel in 2021 on settler colonialism and transnational solidarity. This is part of our feminist festival, Etalase, or Etalase Pemikiran Perempuan. And we situated the case of Palestine in relation to other forms of colonialism, particularly in West Papua and Australia. We invited 3 speakers, Amira Silmi from Birzeit University in the West Bank, Sarah Saleh, a Palestinian Arab activist living in Australia, and Rodewa Nimbo, Christian feminist activist from West Papua. So we discussed how settler colonialism is inseparable from imperial projects in global politics, where the accumulation and circulation of capital are built upon expropriation and marginalization. And we tried to create a dialogue that looked at specific histories and experiences in these three places, exploring new possible routes for transnational solidarity. And here I would like to, because it's really important to amplify Palestinian voices and the voices of women of color in global South feminism, I would like to share their thoughts here from Amira Silmi. I'm just going to read the quotes. Colonialism is linked to capitalism. Uprooting, in this case, uprooting Palestinians, is inherent in the colonial capitalist system. There's a need to dispossess people of their sense of power, their ability to resist, and any kind of feeling of independence and individuality. This is from Sarah Saleh. We need to have difficult conversations about things such as West Papua. If there's support for Palestine, then surely the logical connection would be to know what is happening in West Papua. And this is an important question from Rode Wanimbo to reflect on our readiness for solidarity. It's a great need, and it's truly important to have a global solidarity, but I don't know. I just want to start with a question that comes to myself. I ask myself, am I really ready to listen to the pain, the truth, the reality of the people that I'm going to have solidarity with? Because for me, solidarity without action will not bring an impact. So these speakers demonstrate contemporary feminist thinking that continues and expands the paradigms of Black women of color, third world, and global South feminisms. And this is the paradigm that we need. From a feminist framework, then, when we chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, we imagine not only the time when Palestine will be free, but also the time when we end the racist, colonial, patriarchal, global capitalist system. So the question for us Indonesians, can we Indonesians continue our support for Palestine without rejecting our country's aggressive neoliberalism, our colonialism in West Papua, and re-militarism with our new president? I have some questions, but I think my time is up. Yes, okay, so I'm just going to stop sharing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mbak Intan. I think Mbak Intan is always outspoken in trying to push what she called like paradigm shift in seeing the issue of Palestine as it is actually how we should portray this as the colonial feminist, which is not only anti-patriarchal but also anti-capitalist, anti-racialism, and also seeing this from the point of view from Indonesia. We cannot talk about Palestine struggle without actually also talk about what happening in the domestic affairs in Indonesia, especially that happened in West Papua. I think this is also a very important issue that we need to push forward in this discussion, in this conference. So I think all of the four speakers have presented their thought, and now I will open the Q&A session. I've seen some question here, so maybe I will just try to read one by one, and later the speaker, Dr. Loren, and Dr. Nida Tayim, and also Dr. Siddiqui and Mbak Intan will respond one by one. So I think the first question is from Mas Hasnul, I think. I'm sorry if this is Mas or Mbak. I'm sorry.
It's Mbak Hasnul.
It's Mbak Hasnul. Okay, sorry, Mbak Hasnul. Yeah, even though Dr. Loren already responded your question in the chat box, but I think we also want to know about other scholar reaction in your toward your question. So Mbak Hasnul asking about why yes, he is wondering about why the story or the perspective of Hamas. So as US media tend to represent Hamas in negative ways. So that's the question from Mbak Hasnul. So I think Dr. Lybarger, maybe you can respond first to her question. Dr. Loren, are you still there?
Yes. Hi, Judy.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sure.
Okay. So the question is, why is it that Hamas is portrayed negatively in the media? Is that the question? Okay. Well, it's a complicated question. I think, as we've seen already with the perspective provided from Indonesia, that Hamas isn't necessarily universally and globally perceived in negative terms, but certainly in Europe, in the United States, in North America, that is to say, in Canada and in the United States and in Western European countries, Hamas has most certainly been portrayed negatively. And this goes back to its emergence during the first Intifada. As I was trying to describe, the Islamic movement was perceived, especially by secular nationalists who dominated Palestinian politics up until the 1990s, was perceived as a highly divisive movement. And its emergence coincided with the 1979 revolution in Iran. It coincided with other Islamic movements that were beginning to challenge the post-colonial states that had taken form and had promoted a kind of secular Arab nationalism in the form of Arabism or other forms of secular nationalism. And we're beginning to draw support because there was a perception that these nationalisms that failed to deliver on their promises in the post-colonial period. This was especially the case in the aftermath of the 1967 war, which was perceived as a terrible defeat and failure, especially for Jamal Abdel Nasser and for Arabism generally. And it was in that context that Hamas emerges in the Gaza Strip, becomes reestablished in the Gaza Strip. I'm sorry, not Hamas, but the Muslim Brotherhood becomes reestablished in the Gaza Strip. Now, we have to acknowledge the role of Israel in this, clearly taking the opportunity to divide the Palestinian national movement by providing operating space for the emergence of the Muslim Brotherhood. And that's a complicated story. Israel did not create the Muslim Brotherhood presence in Gaza, but it had provided space to develop and emerge as a countervailing force to the PLO. So, but really, Hamas, when it emerged in 1988, and then into the 1990s, increasingly began to become the face of the armed resistance. And this had a lot to do with the Oslo Agreement, in which the PLO agreed to renounce the armed resistance, the use of force, in exchange for recognition as the full legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. And this diplomatic initiative isolated Hamas. And in response, Hamas put forward the message that it alone was preserving the right to armed resistance and the Palestinian demand for full and complete liberation. So it was one of these historical moments. But in doing this, Hamas began to be perceived quite negatively in the media in the United States as opposed to peace, and opposed to the peace process. And during the Second Intifada, through the use of quite spectacular bombings of civilian sites, it has to be said, basically provided grist for this mill. Alongside that, however, of course, we have to acknowledge, the long and deep Orientalism in the West. And so there was already a proclivity to view Muslims and Islam quite negatively. I mean, the tropes, the anti-Muslim, anti-Islamic tropes that are deeply embedded within, Western literature, Western cultural imagination, as Edward Said demonstrated and showed us, are quite deep, right? And so, it was deeply discouraging, but yet also revealing to see many of these tropes come forward and get refurbished in the presentation of Hamas. After 9/11 in the United States as well, the Israeli government, through its own propaganda mechanisms, went out of its way to link Hamas to Al-Qaeda. And so in the imagination of many people in the United States through the media, this linkage was very powerfully made. And so as far as, the US public goes, there's very little understanding of the distinctions among Islamist movements, very little understanding of the colonial settler context in Palestine, no understanding of the history of ethnic cleansing, and no understanding of the history of the Palestinian national movement. So as far as the population in the United States that consume media, this perception of Hamas, its linkage to Al-Qaeda, and then later the Islamic State, as part of kind of an axis of evil, and Iran, of course, right, and Hezbollah, all of it gets sort of melded together in the casting of Hamas as part of the global Islamic threat. And this has everything to do with, post 9/11 politics. And then, of course, October 7th just simply reaffirms this, reinforces this image of the terrorist Muslim. So I think that would be one answer to that question of why it is that Hamas is portrayed in the way it is in US media.
Dr. Loren, thank you for your answer. So I will continue for another question. I will read all of them, I think, because due to the limited time that we have right now, and I hope that later all speakers can respond toward the participant question. So the second question is from BGD Gayatri. She is asking about Layla Khalid, yeah? So yes, she is asking about Layla Khalid, a women fighter, as she said, but maybe some other call her with different title, yeah? So whether we can call her as a feminist, that's her question. And another question is from Maulidia Al-Hidayah. I'm very empowered by the explanation of the power narrative in the feminist struggle with the Palestinian conflict. In the name of solidarity with Palestine, I would like to ask, how can we win the feminist narrative on social media, especially when these platforms are actually controlled by predominantly masculine entities? Furthermore, how we can ensure that this narrative has the bargaining power to help stop the oppression. So I think those two questions that I would like to pose to a speaker here, maybe, I don't know, maybe Nada Tayim, you want to respond first? And then later, Dr. Dina and also Mbak Intan. Please feel free to respond to that question. Dr. Nada Tayim, she is still here or no? If not yet, then Dr. Dina, maybe could you respond? You are still muted. Sorry.
I'm not muted anymore. Which questions? Okay. I was having a hard time. What was the question? Are they online here?
Yes. So the first question is about Layla Khalid.
There's a question. What about Layla Khalid?
Layla Khalid is a women fighter.
I know who she is, but sorry.
Yes. Yeah, sorry. And whether we can call her as a feminist.
Is there a new generation of women's fighter for Palestine like Layla Khalid?
Yeah.
I think somebody just gave me her biography. Well, there can't be the same kind of generation of Layla, you know, simply because the PLO is not there and there, you know, people aren't taking up arms in quite the same way. I just want to acknowledge that Layla Khalid was one of the people over whom the UN World Conferences in the 1980s had a huge split between the global South women and the global North women, because the Americans in particular were very upset to have the Palestinians, and they wanted, you know, the people from the global South insisted on having the Palestinian issue on the table. And so the Palestine issue globally for feminists has been a long-standing division, because feminists from various global South countries kept wanting to bring imperialism into questions of what counts as feminism, and the Europeans and the Americans, who were the imperial powers, new and old, the feminists kept pushing it away. I think so, and then, you know, somebody mentioned Nawal El-Saadawi. She was also, you know, she was very vocal about the Palestinian issue at these world conferences as well. I think the new generation, there are so many vocal, eloquent Palestinian female activists, not necessarily taking up arms. I think that moment of women or men taking up arms and becoming characters in their own rights is gone. But somebody like Ahed Tamimi was this young woman, very, very articulate. She must be 22, has been jailed several times. Those are the kinds of women to watch out for, right? And Layla Khalid has her own still sort of genealogy. There are several other women who could going in and out of jail that are there. But that was a particular figure in a particular moment in time. When I was young, I wanted to be like Layla Khalid, which is why I know her name. But it's a very, you know, she's also a little bit of a romantic figure there. So I don't know. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Dr.
Oh, I wanted to say one little thing about Hamas and the negative attitude around Hamas. So Rima Hamami, who teaches at the Hebrew Birzeit University, one of the things she's written recently is on violence against women in Gaza before the genocide, obviously. But, you know, Hamas has the only, or had, I'm sure it's gone now, women's shelter in Gaza. And because of the negative attitudes towards Hamas, the absolute inability of European and American powers to think of Hamas as anything but a terrorist group or a hyper misogynist group, that there are these laws that say you can't give money to Hamas. So it was a very underfunded shelter for Palestinian women, but the Palestinian women went, and Hamas is the one that founded that shelter. So this constant collapsing of Hamas and misogyny works really well to bolster settler colonialism and US power and securitization discourses as well. So that's it.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, sorry. So another question maybe, Intan, could you respond? The question from Maulidia. I think this is really relevant with you have mentioned in your presentation.
Yeah, how we can win the feminist narrative on social media, especially when these platforms are controlled by predominantly masculine entities. I think we need to, this is why we need to build connection. We need to form alliance, but of course, you know, with people or groups that share the same views, the same political agenda, and what we need to do is to because, you know, decolonial feminism and, you know, and the radical root of intersectional feminism, these kinds of feminism are really concerned with knowledge production and how women and marginalized people have been excluded from knowledge production. There's a particular knowledge that's considered valid, you know, the Western knowledge or knowledge created by men. And so what we need to do is to form alliance to reject this kind of narrative in, you know, the public sphere of social media. We need to together amplify Palestinian women's voices, Indonesian women from the global south. However, we need to be really, really careful because, you know, social media is in itself a neoliberal capitalist platform. I mean, it's governed by algorithm. So how do we maintain our disobedience while, you know, trying to fight in this kind of platform? And of course, it's dominated by certain elites as well. I think, you know, a lot of work needs to be done, not only on social media, but outside the online world. That work of building connections, linkages. For instance, our collective has this new program, you know, going to school, where we introduce Indonesian feminist thinkers that people didn't even study at school because they were erased. They were probably affiliated to communism or something. You know, so build connection beyond social media. Yes, social media is a side of struggle, but we really need to form alliances beyond that, especially if we want to dismantle the whole structure, which is, you know, increasingly oppressive with the upcoming regime. I guess if other people want to add, please go ahead.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Mbak Dina. Sorry, Mbak Intan. So I think I have one more question that I would like to direct to Dr. Nida Tayim. Is still here? She is still here?
Yes. Can you hear me here?
Okay. Yeah. So I think there is a question from Sayema Hatun. Yeah, so as the Gaza genocide is pushing for reframing feminism in totally different paradigm from neoliberal feminist approach, how we can build effective conceptual tools to make clear point of departure from saving Muslim women and civilizing project. Yeah, please go ahead.
I can't see the question. Can you please?
Yes, you can click to the Q&A.
It's not coming up in the Q&A.
You cannot read it.
I don't
see. It's on the chat. Sorry, it's on the chart actually.
So
it's on the chat.
High up on the chat.
Yeah. So can I should I read it again for you?
Yes, please. I didn't hear it well.
Yeah. So as the Gaza genocide is pushing for reframing feminism in totally different paradigm from the neoliberal feminist approach, how can we build effective conceptual tools to make a clear point of departure from saving Muslim women and civilizing project? That's Sayema question on this issue. Did you get it? No?
Yes, so
it's putting right there, yeah. Okay.
So let me copy and paste and I will put to the question.
That's in the current chat.
It's at the very bottom. I don't know.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I can see it now. Okay.
Please.
Well, if I understand the question well, I think Farid is asking about possible ways for shifting maybe the dialogue or the conversation and try to find other approaches to build effective conceptual tools to make the Palestinian cause maybe more recognized worldwide and depart from the idea of saving the Muslim woman and protecting the civilization project. If I'm correct, I might be able to partially answer the question. Is that what you mean, Farid, or am I wrong? If I'm getting the question right.
Yes, I think the point is how we can make useful alliance or tools to,
Yes,
to work.
yeah.
That's
Yes.
the core of the question.
Right. Yeah. For me, I do think that understanding that feminism and feminism itself should be understood as something transnational rather than specific, and also understanding that there is an intersection of oppression and also intersection of resistance. So starting from the idea of interconnectedness and the idea that we cannot separate forms of oppression from each other or from any location in the world. To go back to Audre Lorde's notion of no woman is free unless all women are free. Maybe we can understand, if we take this notion in consideration, that any form of oppression should be addressed and also should be understood as a feminist issue as well, whether we're talking about Muslim women or other women as well. I hope I answered your question.
No problem. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nida Tayim. I think because we are running out of time, so I would like to ask every speaker to give concluding remark for about 1 minute each. So I will start to Dr. Loren, please.
Okay, thank you. Again, I want to thank all of you for this invitation and this opportunity to take part in this conversation. It has been very much an expanding conversation for me, and I appreciate the questions as well. I would only ask that we do everything that we possibly can to see Palestinians in their complexities, both in Palestine and within Palestine, but beyond it. You know, Palestinians are a global community, and their experiences are many, reflecting the fragmented reality of the Nakba. There is quite a proclivity and quite a bit of desire to reduce Palestinians to simplistic tropes, whether in the discourse of terrorism or in heroic nationalist and Islamist discourses. And we lose sight of the, as I say, of the ways in which Palestinians have made meaning in this world in ways that are highly complex, but require really careful and close listening. And I think this is the beginning of solidarity, is this capacity to listen closely and to understand people's understanding of themselves. Thank you very much, and thank you, Riri and Farid, very much for this invitation to be here.
Thank you very much. And please, Mbak Intan, you can also give your concluding remark.
Yeah, I think I will just share my some reflective questions that I didn't get the chance to share in my presentation. I think it's really important to continue critiquing ourselves and our position. So keep asking ourselves, for people expressing their solidarity for Palestine as non-Palestinians, what kind of framework have we been using when we view Palestine and express our support? What is the ground of our solidarity? And also, it's important to keep asking ourselves, what does it mean when we say Palestine is a feminist issue? And my presentation already answered this, but I think we all need to reflect this based on our experiences as different, as feminists with different backgrounds. And finally, this is a question specifically for fellow Indonesians. How do we support from our position, right, as Indonesians, perhaps, okay, it's probably for Indonesians living in Indonesia, so it doesn't apply to me. But, you know, if you live in a pro-Palestine Muslim majority nation, what are the tactics? What are the strategies? Should we use the same tactics as in the US or UK, rallies, encampment, or can it be different? Can we take advantage of that majority position to build connection with others in the global south or even in the global north, where people can lose their jobs or they can be detained for showing their support for Palestine? So it's important to keep asking these questions so that we can solidify our support. Thank you very much.
Very much, Mbak Intan. And the last one, Dr. Dina Siddiqui.
Hi. Gosh, let's see. There's a lot I didn't say. Well, I think solidarity is very hard work. It doesn't come automatically. We can say we have feminist solidarity, but we have to constantly think what that means in practice. When I was talking about liberal feminism, really, I wasn't only talking about white world, the white middle class feminists, but I think many of us are steeped in certain kinds of capitalist liberal logic in our everyday lives. And there's a lot of self-reflection that feminists need to do, whether you're in Bangladesh or Indonesia or North America, about how you are complicit in a system that constantly normalizes. And my message is, after 8 months of what's going on, please don't allow what is happening to be normalized. And to not normalize that, you need to constantly make these, really think of something, there is, my analytical lens as a transnational feminist, which means constantly looking at the interlocking sort of interconnections between capitalism, nationalism, racism, and colonialism, right? So challenging the logic of settler colonialism and how it works in other places is really important. Making those connections means you'll find it's not just something open out there that's happening. And I think this sort of resonates with what the last speaker said too. You'll find that your lives are intimately related. We're all part of a larger global order that we need to very slowly unpack, right? I think those and as a professor for me, or learning more about Palestine and teaching more about Palestine is also really, really important. Thank you. And thank you, everybody. This has been a very good
Thank you, Dr. Dina.
discussion.
And the last but not least, Dr. Nida Tayem, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, I would like to thank everybody here. I learned a lot, and I would say that maybe the reflection that I can maybe share here with you, that we all keep learning, and also we keep talking. And I also share with the opinion of Dr. Dina, not to give up and not to stop spreading the word, and also not to lose hope, because without hope, there is no liberation. At the end, we learn as well from the Palestinian women and their steadfastness, and what we see in social media is like amazing, because in our eyes, what we see cannot be imagined. And they are the ones who are teaching us and giving us as well lessons in life, never to give up and never to lose hope. Thank you for Palestinian women, and thank you for Palestinians and for their patience, and with whatever we can, we will keep trying to help until Palestine is free. Thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all the speaker. I think I'm not allowed to make any comment anymore because another session is waiting there. So again, thank you very much, Dr. Loren, Dr. Nida Tayim, Dr. Siddiqui, and Dr. Intan for your time and for your wonderful presentation. We learned a lot from you, and we hope that we can stay in touch and having more space to discuss and also learn from each other experience about this issue. Thank you very much. And I'm so sorry if I made any mistake as moderator, and hope to see you again in another conference or another occasion. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Riri. Okay, I will close this session, but before we do that, please, we're gonna make or take a group picture. Would you like to open the camera on the video so we could take the picture together? Okay. So we can show our solidarity. Okay, thank you. I will take like this screen 1, 2, 3, and screen 2. We have like 3 screens. All right. Thank you so much, Mbak Riri Hariro, for being an excellent moderator today. And this is very important conversation. We apologize for the limited time. Thanks also for our distinguished speakers for your invaluable contribution to this special issue. We really appreciate it, and I hope we'll have like more opportunity to talk about this subject, and we'll stand for Palestinians and Palestinians. Nida, thank you so much for your presentation. We learned a lot. Well, we will end this session with and then continue for the parallel sessions. We have 2 panels about the feminist subjects. Thank you again for all of the audiences, the interpreters, and the sign language. Thank you for all of the audiences, and see you at the conference. We still have like 3 more days left of this conference, and we will talk about the Palestinian issue in one of the panel as well in our conference. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody.
I'll ask everyone to unmute, maybe.
Thank you. See you in.
Thank you, Nada.
Intan.
Thank you. Take
So
care.
Nada,
Thank you for the
so much,
invitation.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Mas
much.
Mbak Riri, thank
Thanks a
you.
lot.
Thank you so
Okay,
much.
I will stay. Don't worry.
Okay,
Bye.
Nada, thank you
I'll
so
see you
much.
again.
Thank you
Intan, thank you so
again.
much.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you. It was just a very
Bye-bye.
brief presentation.
See you
Yeah,
at the
thanks.
panel,
Yeah.
okay? Yeah. Bye,
Take
Intan.
care.
Stay
Have a
safe,
good
yeah.
day.